What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Combat Corporation, your source for combat sports. I'm your host, Al the Postmaster Tomorrow, and today I'm really excited to start this new series on the channel. Now that I have my own recording space, my fiance and I just bought a house, so we're really excited about that. So I got my own recording space now. I'm finally able to display all my gloves, which will be the new background to the channel. I love it so far. It looks great looking into the camera. I posted on my social medias over the last couple of days about a new series of the channel, and I want to call it the Topic Series. I'm not going to put like an exact name to it. I'm just going to put like titles of, you know, a question or just the topic itself, basically. And so I posted a couple days ago, and a lot of people said they'd be really interested to hear what I have to think about it and open discussion for all those things. And I'm really excited to do that and go forward with this on the channel because I think I really love discussing combat sports. I honestly don't like a whole lot else. You know, I do work outside of, you know, being a pro MMA fighter, a up-and-coming pro MMA fighter. Just only have the 1-0 fight now, but still. But I love combat sports as my life. It's what I watch every single day. It's what I think about every single day. And I just want to talk about it too, because this is really my passion. So I wanted to start this topic series. I want to try and get more people on the channel for interviews like I used to have. And then on top of it, I want to have like podcasts and stuff every now and again. Just see how it goes. Maybe some watch parties when we watch fights and stuff. Because I love doing that. So maybe I'll look back into, I do have my degree in audio engineering, but maybe I'll look back into getting some mics and get some guys, local fighters and stuff on the show, just so I could and get them in studio now, I guess you could say, and get them to sit down and talk about their fights coming up and everything. But today, I want to start the series with something that happened over the last weekend at UFC 288 between Aljamain Sterling and Henry Cejudo for the main event. But I want to talk about a fight that was earlier in the evening with Gracie versus Charles Jourdain, right? And I posted this to my social media page, and a lot of people actually, the responses were kind of surprising for me when I posted a little question about it. And my question of the day is for the entire thing, and I want to preface it by saying I love the sport I'm about to talk about. I've competed in it, I've participated in it, and on top of it, I love all combat sports. And the amount of discipline, time, and effort, and money, honestly, at the end of the day, that you have to put into these sports is a lot. But my question today, relating that fight between Gracie and Charles Jourdain, is: does Gracie Jiu Jitsu still work in modern mixed martial arts? I don't mean has it ever worked or will it ever work. Obviously, it works in a lot of scenarios, but does Gracie Jiu Jitsu alone win you modern mixed martial artists, you know, against modern mixed martial artists, or in the sport of modern MMA? And I think a lot of people are immediately going to say, well, of course, not just jiu-jitsu, because, you know, everyone knows it now. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I want to talk a little bit about, like, the idea behind Gracie Jiu Jitsu. And I'd like to say I separate Gracie Jiu Jitsu from Brazilian Jiu Jitsu sometimes. And I know a lot of people are going to get confused by that and be like, well, the Gracie's created Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which history will show you, yes, to a certain extent. Submission grappling has been around for a very, 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 very long time. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu was, I think, the first submission grappling art that was ever very much vocalized to the public, that was seen through the eyes of UFC 1 back in 1999 with Royce Gracie, and then there was the Gracie challenges and stuff like that. Obviously, we have Gracie combatives that still goes on, but I think Gracie Jiu Jitsu is so much different because they have such a strict guideline of how they promote people, what they do, and everything like that, whereas there's other bodies that do things like that, like all other different lineages. Like, I don't know my entire lineage, but when I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like Gi Jiu-Jitsu and stuff, I know my lineage. My school was Oniana Jiu-Jitsu Academy. We were under a school called Tai Kai. That was under Team Balance. And I have no idea who Team Balance is or what they did. I never really cared about that because I come from boxing. And yes, you would always talk about who you trained with in boxing, but usually you saw some guys come from some really unknown people and they were still good. And I think you're starting to get to that point in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think guys are popping up here or there, and it's so popular. Submission grappling and BJJ, no gi, and all those things are so popular. But I separate Gracie Jiu-Jitsu because of how, I won't say old-fashioned to a certain extent, because obviously every Gracie that you see is pretty good at what they do because they grew up in the gi, right? But I think Gracie Jiu Jitsu in modern mixed martial arts, separating from BJJ and no-gi and all those things, like Gracie Jiu Jitsu, we'll just stick it to that, like with Crone and what he did this last weekend. I think this last weekend it kind of proved that you cannot have the style that Royce Gracie had in the mid-90s or Renzo Gracie had in the mid-90s. Although I think Renzo was a much more completed fighter than Royce ever was. You know, and people will say, well, what about Royce's legendary battles with Kazushi Sakuraba and all those things? Yes. And Royce Gracie back in the day tapped out Dan Severn and tapped out Ken Shamrock and all these guys that were accomplished grapplers, but no one understood submission arts quite to the extent. Kazushi Sakuraba did because he grew up catch wrestling. And I'm not one of those freaks saying that catch wrestling is the end all be all, but he was a very good wrestler that understood enough submission grappling to not get him in trouble. He didn't necessarily out grapple Royce. It wasn't like it was a submission art war. It was more like, I'm just going to stifle everything you do and make you look silly because I'm just not going to play into your game. I'm just going to wrestle you, stand up when I feel like I'm in danger, because why would I go into the snake pit? You know, it was basically the idea. But Crone this last weekend did a lot of what he does and what you'd see as Gracie combatives. And you see that with guys like Henner Gracie. You know, and Gracie Breakdown. I love watching his videos. You know, I think he's really smart when it comes to certain things. I think some of it is just he can market himself anywhere, and he's good at it. But my thing is like, whenever he says, well, really what this guy did during the, I shouldn't do the voice, but you know, really what this guy did during this this video is that he used Gracie Combative's Article 3, Subsection 5, move number 12, you know, stuff like that is what he does. There's a specific line of what to do. And that's a lot of things. Like I remember guys testing for their blue belt or purple belt, brown belt, black belt, and they had to do certain self-defense techniques. They had to do certain things along those lines, which I'm sure derived from the Gracies. Obviously, he had to. But Crone went in against Charles Jourdain and did a lot of pulling guard, butt scooting, and people that don't know butt scooting, it's literally when you're on your butt and you start dragging yourself towards them so you can use your legs to wrap people up and bring them down to the floor from the floor itself and do that. Then on top of it, there's a lot of, like I said, pulling guard, very weird strikes into, you know, diving for legs and very poorly attempted takedown attempts and all those things that you kind of see in the Gracie combatives. Now, I think maybe the game plan could have been executed better, but at the same time, I feel like it's worked for Crone until now. It didn't work against Cub Swanson. Cub Swanson's jiu-jitsu is very good. He's a very high-level black belt. I remember that was actually a big point of controversy between, excuse me, Cub Swanson couldn't train at certain Gracie Baja gyms or something like that because he was fighting Crone Gracie, which is crazy. And people thought that was not true. I remember when my teammate Dave Marfone fought Neiman Gracie, or Neiman Gracie, however you want to say it, in Bellator for his debut, and we're actually a Renzo affiliate to a certain extent. My coach knows Renzo very well, and we had to get permission from Renzo to fight his nephew, basically. And the funny thing is that Neiman's last name isn't actually Gracie. It's like Strumbowski or something like that. Which, you know, but obviously you have the Gracie family in your blood. You have to take the last name to fight, which I think is a bit much. But still, I would want to do it, progress my career a lot longer, a lot faster, I would say. But when we talk about the situation with Crone, you saw how it just didn't work as much. And here's why. In modern MMA, everyone practices everything. Right? You get guys, and they talked about this years ago, there's going to be up-and-coming guys that will train everything to a point to where they're not going to be a wrestling guy or a wrestler, a boxer, kickboxer, jiu-jitsu guy starting out MMA. It's going to be, I'm an MMA fighter. I didn't have a background other than I started MMA. I remember, although he got knocked out by Joaquin Buckley, but Impa Kasanganay didn't start fighting. I want to say he's in his mid-30s now, but didn't start fighting until his like late 20s and learning that as he goes. He excuse me, he looks like a very well-rounded fighter. He can wrestle well, he can strike well, he can do everything like that well. You know, and then obviously you get big guys that were phenomenal in sports. Obviously Henry Cejudo was a great wrestler, and he was able to adapt to all these other sports, right? So that's a big thing, right? You know, or Daniel Cormier was able to adapt. But then there were other guys that got into it. And I guess you can even title this video, Do One-Trick Ponies Work in the Sport of Modern Mixed Martial Arts Anymore? Talk about a guy like Gokhan Saki, right? Who was a phenomenal kickboxer, Turkish Tyson, they always called him. Knocked people dead in kickboxing. He knocked one guy out in the UFC. He was like, I think 1-1. Then he was 2-1. Then he fights Khalil Rountree, who, yes, is a big, powerful striker, a big, powerful man. But realistically, if you were to put them on paper, who's going to fight in a kickboxing match? Obviously, Khalil Rountree probably would have gotten destroyed. But Khalil Rountree is a MMA fighter with over 20 fights, right, at that point, going against Gokhan Saki. Gokhan has so much more experience and all these things. But what happened? Khalil Rountree catches him, knocks him out, right? And then you see other specialists from the jiu-jitsu side with Gracie, right? Very accomplished grappler. Let's talk about a couple other accomplished grapplers in MMA, right? Gary Tonin fought for the one championship. Featherweight or lightweight is Tong Lee. I can't remember. I want to say lightweight. And Tong Lee knocked him out when he fought for the title. Granted, Gary Tonin, I think, is very well-rounded, and I think he did a very good job. And I do like watching him fight. His submission grappling is great, but he does well in MMA because he practices everything else. But when we talk about Ryan Hall, right, who just dives and spams Imanari rolls, spin kick. Well, what about the spin kick against Darren Elkins? That's all it was. Dive for the spin kick. Jab every now and again. His striking, he doesn't go out of his way to strike or learn how to strike, really. And you just see him, he coaches a lot of guys for jiu-jitsu, for MMA. But I think his jiu-jitsu is more for just plainly jiu-jitsu. I think his jiu-jitsu is, let's stop the leg attacks. Let's stop the leg locks. But besides Ryan Hall, Gary Tonin, and a lot of those guys, you see Cyril Gahn got one. I don't see a whole lot of heel hooks stopping fights in modern MMA as much anymore. Because if you are on top and you're smashing the guy out in mount or even in guard, and then you just dive down and go for the leg, well, now you put yourself in a position where you can get destroyed unless you know exactly what you're doing. But if you know you're sweating on top of it, whereas I can smash you out from that position, right? And then on top of it, if you turn over, you're going to give me your back, or you're going to give me something that's gonna open up a lot better than diving for a leg attack or a heel hook. Although, granted, if I was fighting Ryan Hall, I'd avoid the ground like the plague. But you saw Ilia Topuria decided, oh, okay, I'm a good grappler too. I'm just not going to go to the mat with this guy that's going to try and engage. I'm going to wait for him to keep spamming Imanari rolls. The crowd's going to boo a little bit. He's going to do it one more time. He's going to catch himself at a bad angle, and then I'm going to catch him. I'm going to hip trap him, and then I'm just going to hammer fist him out. And that's exactly what happened, right? Because Ryan Hall, for me, isn't so much of a mixed martial artist as he is a jiu-jitsu practitioner that practices MMA every now and again. That's why I don't think he'll ever remotely come close to a title shot or even a really top 15 or 10 rank within the next couple of years. I think people are going to see the blueprint of how to stop Ryan Hall, excuse me, and beat him. Same thing with Crone. I think Crone, obviously, I remember he got into the UFC and fought Alex Caceres, and there's like a video clip of him doing Gracie combatives right next to it. It was a knee stomp into waiting for the punch to come over, duck underneath it, grab it, grab a rear body lock, lace your leg around into a body lock takedown, into a rear naked choke. And he did that against Alex Caceres. But obviously that's not going to work against Cub Swanson, right? That's not going to work against a guy like Charles Jourdain, who's very well-rounded. And that's exactly, Charles Jourdain even got on the mic and said it was a very outdated style. And then going into my next topic on this, I guess, about Gracie Jiu Jitsu and if it still works, I like to play with time travel a little bit sometimes and think what would happen. Dana White said it was like watching a fight from 1995, which I agree. It really did look like it was a guy like Royce Gracie fighting in. And I would argue, and a lot of people say this, and I'll start big and gradually go smaller. Dan Severn fought Royce Gracie, and sometimes I'm inclined to believe Dan Severn when he says, I in good conscience could not rain strikes down on Royce Gracie because I had all these years of rules and regulations. You can believe it or not believe that. But Dan Severn took him down at will and kept him there because of his size and everything. He eventually got tapped out by a triangle choke. I think it was like 28 minutes or 32 minutes into the fight. That's fine. Take Dan Severn out of that equation and put a guy like Mark Coleman. Only a few years difference there. Put Mark Coleman in there. How would that fight go? Honestly, think about that. If that was in UFC 1, per se, and Royce Gracie was put in there with Mark Coleman, how would that have gone? Gracie Jiu Jitsu never would have taken off, in my opinion, because Mark Coleman would have wrestled him, taken him down, headbutted him, elbowed him, smashed him to fits, ground and pound, Godfather ground and pound. That would have been it. Well, let's go a little smaller. What about a guy like Dominic Cruz? If you put him in against Royce Gracie, and Dominic Cruz is actually smaller than Royce Gracie. I think Dominic Cruz can't get taken down by Royce Gracie. Dominic Cruz has a very good understanding of grappling. He's a very great wrestler, and on top of it, he can strike really well. What about a guy that's not ranked in the top 15? Who's a guy? He's retired now, but towards the end of his career, he wasn't ranked. Let's talk about Cowboy. Well, if you put Cowboy Cerrone in UFC 1, obviously he's going to beat everybody. Ken Shamrock lost in the first round because he was confused at what was going on in the first one. Then they rematch and it's a draw because they just go for such a long time, right? And then they fight when they're in their mid-50s, come on. But then you take Royce Gracie and put him in the modern era against Matt Hughes in the mid-2000s, and obviously Matt Hughes is going to destroy him because Matt Hughes, dominant wrestler, no striking, has really good submission games, right? And he's not necessarily a jiu-jitsu black belt. I don't know if he ever got that. I need to do research on that. But he's not necessarily a jiu-jitsu black belt, but his wrestling is so good that he's like, okay, I'm just going to learn how to torque certain things. And he almost tapped Royce with a straight arm lock, right? So when you have that going on, and then he says, oh, screw that, just start beating him to death, at that point, the ref has to save him. Then I argue this with a lot of people. If you're watching this, and we all have our local MMA scene, right? If you put the best guy in your gym, right, inside of a cage in 1993 through like maybe 2000 of guys that didn't understand jiu-jitsu, right, and you put a high-level amateur, he'd probably win UFC 1. That's my thought to it, because they'd be so well-rounded that I think if Royce could never take anyone down, that'd be it, and then especially if you know a guy that knows how to stop hips, how to smash down and everything like that knows grappling and striking and submission grappling specifically for the sport of modern mixed martial arts, I think it'd be a lot different nowadays compared to what it was so long ago. That's just my idea behind it, and then a lot of people will say, like, they'll say this back to me, you're not a black belt. You're right. Technically, I don't train jiu-jitsu anymore because I don't care about sport jiu-jitsu. I don't go to Grappling Industries or Nagas often. I don't care about Fuji's or IBJJF tournaments because they don't matter to me. Wrestling tournaments don't matter to me. Boxing, I got very far in boxing, but that doesn't matter to me anymore. So I don't really do those tournaments. I don't compete in those things because I'm doing MMA specific training. I'm training for the sport of MMA. Because I always tell people this, if you're a jiu-jitsu guy watching this, imagine, someone has full mount on you and you go to shrimp away. Naturally, you put both your hands, you get on your hip and you push away with both hands. What's the matter with this in MMA? My hands are way out here. Are they by my head? No. So naturally in MMA, we got to keep one here, protect yourself, push yourself away that way, right? There's other things. Dive for a leg lock, like I said. You dive for a leg lock and I get out, boom, bang, now I'm going to start punching you. All right, it's not going to be good. Or I'll just stand up and be like, now you got to come to my world. I've had multiple situations where in MMA have fought guys that have a high level of grappling. I used my teammate Kyle, who fought this guy for a Northeastern featherweight, I think at the time it was a featherweight championship, or it might have been lightweight. And this guy had competed in like an 80cc qualifier. He was a high-level black belt from Canada, and it was a big deal. And I remember Kyle took him down and smashed him before he stood up and knocked him out. And it scared the guy that he fought because he was strictly a jiu-jitsu guy. He had some striking. But the thing is Kyle understood how to stop his hips in an MMA setting and smash him out, right? I've seen that multiple times. Like, we've had a bunch of guys that were very good. We had a guy that was a very good brown belt in jiu-jitsu. My teammate Brendan got him in an armbar, and he's never trained in a gi once in his life. Yet this guy's been doing jiu-jitsu for almost 10 years or however long. He's a brown belt. And Brendan's not even technically a white belt, gets a slick armbar in on him because he knows MMA positioning, right? He's smashing him out. The guy shrugs him off. So naturally, he's like, oh, cool. I got shrugged off. I'm ready. There's the armbar, and we're good. And I see that happen all the time. I can name 1,000 different examples. Like my good friend Corey's a phenomenal wrestler, and he loves catch wrestling, right? He's fought guys that have black belts in jiu-jitsu, and he's subbed them. He's TKO'd them on the floor because he has such good cage awareness and such good wrestling on the mat. He wrestled an Olympic wrestler that wrestled in the 2016 Olympics, and Corey out-wrestled him, right? That's because he understands what you need to do for the sport of modern mixed martial arts. It's not just that specific thing anymore. It's not which discipline wins anymore. That time is kind of gone, right? So, and you've seen so many different scenarios of that happening. I just named a few local amateur fights. Talk about big time. Like I said, Royce Gracie got destroyed by Matt Hughes. Another one, like I said, Gokhan Saki gets knocked out by Khalil Roundtree. Very good kickboxer, gets knocked out by an average MMA fighter. I mean, you can't really say average because he's in the UFC, but you get what I mean. Demetrius Johnson versus Wilson Hayes, right? Wilson Hayes, a very accomplished guy. I believe he competed in ADCCs, gets subbed by him with an armbar. Same thing with Horiguchi, who's a very good catch wrestler, right? DJ subs him. Then if you talk about a couple other guys in that situation, Kron Gracie obviously just lost his last weekend. Ryan Hall's been stopped. That's what happens. I think it was Rodolfo Vieira, right? Or Rodolfo Vieira, however you say that, got subbed by a guy who wanted his purple belt after subbing Rodolfo Vieira inside of the cage. But that's because Rodolfo tried every submission attempt in the world. The guy understood very good cage awareness because of MMA, stops it, gets out, and I think he got him in a guillotine or an armbar. I can't remember. I got to go back and watch that fight. But I remember that happening because Joe Rogan, obviously the guy's a jiu-jitsu guy. He's like, he's one of the best jiu-jitsu guys in the world in this, and he just got subbed by a guy who doesn't even have his purple belt yet, right? So what does that tell you? And that's like if you take a world-class boxer and put him in the middle of an MMA cage. I mean, that very rarely does the strict discipline nowadays work. Think about Max Holloway. That guy was never a high school wrestling standout. How often do you see Max Holloway taken down and just whooped? Right? He boxes very well, stops takedowns very well, has good offset throws and everything like that. Alexander Volkanovski just played rugby, but almost beats Islam Makhachev. And Islam's been doing that for the rest of his life. For his entire life, rather, and Volk has only been doing it since his mid-20s. So, if this doesn't tell you that modern guys that are learning everything at once are starting to take over the sport, I don't know what will. So, to answer the question for me, does Gracie Jiu Jitsu still work? Yes, but it needs to be tied into everything. It can't just be Gracie Jiu Jitsu by itself. It can't just be BJJ by itself. It can't be just boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, or anything like that by itself. At an amateur level, I've seen it pulled off really well. But I've also seen it at an amateur level go really bad. Like a guy that was a state championship wrestler went up against my teammate Ja, who's never wrestled a day in his life, and he's literally in a wrestling stance, shoots, and then gets caught in a double wrist lock or a Kimura, whatever you like to say, a double wrist lock position, and Ja breaks his arm. So, that's just how it goes, because Ja understood, okay, I can't stop the shot, so I'm going to establish control on something else, right? Whereas maybe if that was a jiu-jitsu guy getting caught in the Kimura, he would have known how to reverse it, but would have got caught with a strike or something. The amount of boxers you see get their leg kicked, because everyone says it's the stance. I disagree. It's not the stance. It's that they're not training leg kick training enough. They're not trying to get their defense for leg kicks up enough. Things like that, like they're not actively training that. It's not in their muscle memory yet to do that. Their muscle memory is, here comes a kick, boop, now I got a jab now. That's the idea behind that, right? So that's my whole spiel, I guess, on if something like Gracie Jiu Jitsu will still work. I think it does, obviously. And here's the thing, put any of these guys, put Charles Jourdain on a Jiu Jitsu mat with Kron Gracie, obviously Kron's probably going to sub him, right? Because that's his world. Right? That's just his world. That's how it goes. It's the same thing with Aljo and Henry Cejudo this last weekend. In a cage, Aljo beat him. I think some people thought Cejudo won, right? But if you put them on a wrestling mat, Henry Cejudo's an Olympic gold medalist, and there are some very talented Division III guys. In fact, Aljamain Sterling wrestled at SUNY Cortland, which is only 2 hours from me. I wrestled against them in college, right? For SUNY Oneonta. I have met some phenomenal Division III talent that could easily beat D1 guys, right? And I've seen that in tournaments. But Henry Cejudo is an Olympic gold medalist. Obviously, he's going to beat Aljo in a strict wrestling match. Size difference or all, right? It's the same thing when you saw Cejudo fight DJ the first time. Took him down easy. DJ got up. Didn't expect that, and then he got stopped, right? And then the second fight obviously was much more competitive. But that's like my whole idea is that, like I said, you could easily title this video, do one trick ponies still work in this sport. But I think the easiest way to word it is Gracie Jiu Jitsu works. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu works if you tie it in with everything else. Other than that, it's just not going to work by itself. I know a lot of Gracie Jiu Jitsu guys and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu guys will disagree with that. I think it's one of the best things you can ever have for self-defense. I personally think learning the whole of MMA is the best for self-defense because, if you have to strike, you can. If you have to wrestle, you can. If you fall down to the floor, then you can, start using your jiu-jitsu. But I think that it's great for self-defense. I think it's great. It's a lovely sport. I love jiu-jitsu. I love catch wrestling. I love sambo. Every single type of submission art, right? But my thing is, you need in modern MMA to know more. You will get destroyed if you're just set on the one. That's my opinion at the end of the day. If you disagree or agree, put your comments in the comment section below. Like I said, I know I'm going to get a lot of, you're not even a black belt. How would you know? That is what it is, right? I understand. But honestly, nowadays, you don't need to be a black belt to be good in the sport of MMA. That's the question. That's the sport that I know about is MMA. As a competitor, people are going to say, you only want to know as a pro and your amateur record wasn't that great. Well, there's always the invite. You can always stop by the gym. But that's besides the point. But my whole thing, guys, is I really want to do more of this series so people can, tell me in the comments below what they think about this. Do you think Gracie Jiu Jitsu still works? How do you think Gracie Jiu Jitsu could actually advance more in MMA? And more or less, what exactly will happen to Gracie Jiu Jitsu in the future? And do you think Kron Gracie kind of entered the fight with a really bad game plan? Do you think, what would he have done different? Do you think he could have beat Charles Jourdain if he had just stuck to something different? Let me know in the comments below. And let me know of topics that you want me to go over in the future. More glove reviews to come out soon. Now that I got the new background, I'm going to start doing that relatively soon. But I just figured I'd start this because I've always wanted to. And I love the background of this now. So without further ado, folks, thank you so much for watching the Combat Corporation, your source for combat sports. And I'll see you on the next episode. Have a good one, everybody.